I mean, I get this one a lot, so this is good. So one misconception is that progressive education means there's really no structure. You can kind of do anything you want. Anything goes. It's permissive. Though that sort of quality, you don't take math and science seriously. That sort of flavor. And one of the things that we've tried to draw on in the history and the tradition of progressive education are certain understandings, and certainly, a spokesperson, an educator like Francis Parker, there was no fooling around with this guy. He was all for empowering students, but they better step up to the job. I mean, the sense of excellence and structure. Now, the structure may not look the same to a parent who doesn't come from a progressive background. You walk into a school, you walk into the Francis Parker School in Chicago, and you might see a group of older students sitting on some benches in the hallway, maybe sitting on the floor, and you think, what is this? You know, you're supposed to be sitting at a desk and studying. This is how it was when I was a kid. But the structure is they are working in small groups. The collaborative dynamic is happening. They are fully engaged. They're staying after school. They're not leaving immediately. There are all kinds of subtle ways that the teachers, whether they're in a second grade class or a seventh grade class or a high school class, empower certain opportunities for independence. So independent studies are built into all of the courses and all of the educational programs, where a teacher will offer the opportunity. You can study one of 5 things on this list that you'd like, or is there something else you want to look at for this particular project? So the idea that something that might not look familiar to the straight row or to the kind of discipline you might see in other kinds of schools doesn't mean the structure isn't there. It's a very complex structure, and that's sort of one set of thoughts that come to mind.
There's kind of an interesting one that occurred in my hometown in Greenville, South Carolina. We had 2 school districts, and one was a district of all of the textile mills. And back in the 30s, the superintendent of education of the mill district hired one of the Dewey followers, a fellow named Hollis Caswell, to come down and look at the Parker School District. And they started training people to work in the mills in high school. And people got the wrong notion about that. Of course, the people in the mills thought it was great because they didn't have any time when they had to spend money training loom fixers and floor sweepers and weavers and all of that, because they were learning that in high school. That kind of was not what Dewey had in mind.
There are other pieces. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Just offer one other thought. We mentioned the AP courses. So this may be more of a high school slant, and I know this is a K-8 school. But at our school, we do not offer any AP courses in our high school. We offer, so if you want to come in and you see a structure, where's that structure? Where's the traditional AP course? Doesn't look familiar. I'm not going to send my kid there. When we talk to them about what do, we hold help sessions for students, so they have the basis of the courses we do teach, and with a few additional help sessions on how do you take a test like this, the students score 4s and 5s on these kind of tests. If you look at, well, how do they do in the sciences? You'll see groups of students working to write grants, and our students win grants from institutions like MIT for engineering projects. So it's how do you do business in the adult world is one way we help structure those alternatives to just sit down and take the test in a standardized fashion.
I think other misconceptions that are related to the unstructuredness is somehow that we allow kids to misbehave in progressive schools, and in fact even encourage them to misbehave. The opposite is true. I would argue that the kinds of projects that we're talking about, the kinds of work that kids are engaged in, actually demand more of their behavior. If you're going to be a partner in your own learning, you need to partner up. You need to be responsible in a way that is asking much more of you than if you're a passive recipient of what the teacher's telling you to memorize. Another misconception has to do with politics. Progressive is a word that means a lot of different things to people. While there are certainly many people who would consider themselves progressive politically in this room and in this community, that's not what progressive education is. We are not trying to promote a political agenda. We do believe in a social mission. That social mission is connected to acceptance and helping others. But beyond that, it's not about a political party or a political platform. I also think a major misconception that people have about progressive schools is that because kids appear to be having so much fun, the work couldn't be very serious or intellectual. And I'd like to push against that. Why can't school be fun? Aren't we all sort of programmed to learn? And don't we all feel our best when we're doing things that have value? And I'd say that kids, I think kids in our schools enjoy what they're doing because they're doing more than memorizing. They're doing things that have value beyond school. They see themselves and their ideas valued by the adults that they're working with. They perceive that, again, what they're doing is valuable. And of course, we know that people learn more by doing than just by observing. And so I think that's a misconception. I think the other misconception is that somehow the kids are running the school. That if you walk into a room and you see groups of kids sitting on a bench, where's the teacher? This doesn't look like what I remember. The adults must not be in charge, but that's far from it. It may not look, as Dan said, like what many of us had, but the adults are clearly in charge. And the other misconception is because students' ideas are valued and students are given choices, I think some people believe that progressive schools don't really have a curriculum, that it's all sort of based on what the students want to do on any given day. And that's far from the truth. I think there's obviously a balance. I think when you're able to capitalize on students' interests and have a teaching moment, but certainly our schools have a curriculum that we follow and standards that we're working towards that are important. I think the other misconception is that because it doesn't look very structured, it must be kind of easy to do, that the teachers probably roll out of bed and they come in and they say, go, do what you're going to do. And the reality is, I think for any teacher in this room who's tried this kind of pedagogy, it is much more difficult. You really are thinking about, you're not just amassing information, you're creating a learning experience. It reminds me, I spent some time in Russia, and I was involved in a NEH program with American and Russian high school and middle school history teachers. And we were in Moscow in a meeting one day, and we were asked to design a lesson about either the Russian or the American Civil War. And so the American teachers all went off, and we designed these interactive activities that had certainly there was content to be learned, but most of our work went into thinking about how to engage the kids. What sort of questions were we going to ask? What kind of product were we going to ask them to produce? How was that product going to excite them and get them really to learn about the Civil War? The Russian teachers essentially wrote down all of the events of the Civil Wars. That was their lesson. It was the information. It wasn't the engagement. And I would venture to guess that the students who experienced those lessons that were more engaging not only learned more about the Civil War, either the American or the Russian Civil War, but they also came away with other skills that were designed to be taught during that lesson.